Hi, everyone. Welcome to another weekly coaching conversation with GoMobi.work. Each week, we bring you a topic in leadership, employee development, and teamwork that you can use to make your team's work more effective and to create a more fulfilling work environment for everybody that you are interacting with. That comes from everybody at your team to everybody that you serve. We really want these to be as informative and helpful for you as possible, giving you something that you can actually use with your team. So thank you for joining us. My name is Wade Bruffy. I am the co-founder and CEO of GoMobi.work. And as always, I'm joined by my co-founder and our chief coaching officer, Zoltan Sarda.
Hi, everybody. It's good to have you join us. We hope, again, as always, that this is useful. Today, we are really focusing on one of Wade and my favorite topics around really looking at personal development and professional skill development. So hope it's, again, useful for you. And again, as always, we put these conversations in context with the other sessions that we've led. So if you see some connections, and we'll be making some connections to other things that we've been talking about, but feel free to go in and look at those previous videos as well.
Yeah, they're all on our YouTube channel. So if you need that, we will be, if you click through this post that if you're watching this on the recording, you'll either be directly on the YouTube channel or be able to find it very easily. So and if you have any other questions, send us a message, we'll get it to you. But we're very excited. As Zoltan mentioned, this is one of our favorite topics because we really believe that skill development is one of the most vital parts of any organization's mission. It's really one of the things that especially in a skilled workforce, that if you're not doing training, you're falling behind. It's not really a thing you can coast on. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we see that showing up and what you can do about it today. So we have a couple of quotes that we love from some people that we really respect to get us started. And so the first one is from Keith Cunningham, and this is from a book that he wrote called The Road Less Stupid. And that book is about leading oneself and leading a business and all the different elements of what leadership really means. What is the job, the task of a leader in order to be the most effective that they can be? So a lot of cool stuff there. And what he writes in this book, one of the things he writes is that mastery is practicing the right things in an effort to get better. When the training stops, so does the progress. And we're going to talk a little bit about practicing the right thing today. So I want you to hold that in your mind. Now, another common thing that we see a lot when we work with customers is that they often will say, how we just don't have the bandwidth to do this. This is just a really big project. We're afraid of it. And one of the reasons why we exist as a company is to help organizations speed that process up in the first place. But to those who would say, we're just too busy to do this at all, we would refer you to this Ben Horowitz quote. And if you're familiar with Ben is a really successful venture capitalist, one of the most successful in history. And he wrote this book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, where he talks about a lot of leadership principles. So he wrote here that ironically, the biggest obstacle to putting a training program in place is the perception that it will take too much time. Keep in mind that there is no investment that you can make that will do more to improve productivity in your company. Therefore, being too busy to train your people is the moral equivalent of being too hungry to eat. So being too hungry to eat, it doesn't make any sense. I love this analogy because you would never be too hungry to eat. So being too busy to train is the same. You have to be thinking about how can we promote people's skill development. And if you have the right system in place, and we're going to talk about that today, it's not as big of a burden as a lot of leaders think, and you can really create some amazing results. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And the way that we talk about this is through something that we really love, and that's deliberate practice. We're going to be talking a bit about where we get these ideas from, but to just define deliberate practice quickly, deliberate practice is intentional, goal-driven practice that is designed to address certain weaknesses and make certain improvements. And this definition comes from the work of Anders Ericsson, who is a social scientist, and his work has been seminal in the understanding of what makes us get better at things. That's what his research is all about. And he's informed a lot of the pop culture stuff that you may have read already in Harvard Business Review or wherever you're getting your business leadership publication. there's a lot of stuff out there about Anders' work, and a lot of it is actually misinterpreted. And so Zoltan's going to share the number one example that we find of that right now.
Yeah, and this again, this came to sort of popular knowledge through Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, which is a great book. It really is. But he has a whole chapter called the 10,000 hours rule, which was that to become a master at anything, to develop mastery at anything, takes about 10,000 hours of work. And so if you think about how many hours are in a work week, 40 hours, 10,000 divided by that, there's substantial time. The thing that's interesting is Anders Ericsson never put a number. There was never any magic number of hours. And what they found is that, and Anders Ericsson's early work was really focused on why is it that some people in music, some musicians achieve mastery on it, like they become like, those transcendent kind of artists, and others don't. And again, it was not about the number of hours. It was how you practice. It's what you did to practice. Some people could, you could practice for 100,000 hours and never develop mastery. Some people might develop mastery in some way in 3,000 hours. So it's really more about how you practice that is the difference.
Yeah. And so there are a few ways that he talks about this. And Zoltan, if you would get us started on the first few, we're going to talk about all of them, but there's some characteristics of it.
Yeah. So there is these pieces here. So one is that it's really highly targeted. So a musician is thinking about this is a reason why a musician will play scales. It's just like, how are they getting their fingering exactly right? How are they getting the tone right? They're focusing on one specific skill at a time. Again, so it's taking that small section. I remember when I was probably about 7. I was learning to play guitar. My teacher, he would have me, if I made a mistake on a section of a piece I was playing, he'd have me repeat that thing until I could play it perfectly 3 times in a row, which was like, it was really difficult, but it kind of works. And he would, so early on, he was bringing some of this kind of work into that his teaching with me.
Yeah. And one of the other parts of that is that deliberate practice is highly focused. As Zoltan, I love that example, is literally perfect. Feels like they got it straight out of the study that they did right from the book. But it's that deliberate practice is really focused on one specific skill. And so one of the things that they researched is what kinds of skills are being practiced. Well, we often hear about we need to just focus on our strengths, and to a degree that is true, but there's a real interesting element of deliberate practice where you're picking to practice the thing that maybe you screwed up, and you have to really go through that one little section of the music. Maybe it's only 30 seconds of notes that you're trying to play, but what you're doing is really purposefully going back and practicing and mastering that section. And so if you're relating that to a work example, maybe like one of the ways that we see this done is often with coding boot camps. So if you're in a boot camp, there might be a particular kind of problem that you need to learn how to solve. And you might do practice coding challenges over and over and over in order to learn that particular skill, that particular discipline, how to link a list, how to choose something else that's going to reference another page, whatever it might be. You have to do those problems over and over and over if you notice that that's a common flaw. So you're addressing a common flaw through this. And you really want to limit it in a time frame as well, because it's such intense practice that you can't just do it for hours on end. You might start for 15 minutes, maybe you work your way up to an hour at some point, but it's really, really targeted.
And it's that piece that really effective people, they don't practice what they're already good at. I know in my life, a lot of times I do practice what I'm really good at because it feels good. That's not going to help me get better, right?
Yeah, so you can't practice only that stuff.
And the next piece, and this again goes to a lot of the work that Wade and I have been talking about over the last several months, around what is the goal, that we really want to have a very specific outcome, very specific goal that you can really name as this is the thing that I'm working on, this is the thing I'm going for. So we have some examples here. Complete 10 data annotations in under 10 minutes with 100% accuracy. That idea of, can I give an elevator pitch in under 60 seconds? Those are really, they're measurable, they're observable. You can bring data into it, and you can have some evidence of whether you're meeting those goals or not. So if you think about, a musician playing a piece of music, it's clear, like a recording of that piece of music is your evidence. So, but what's the evidence and what's the goal that you're looking for?
Yeah. And one of the things that helps to be effective in looking at what goal you're working towards is to perform this kind of practice in a feedback rich environment. So what does that mean? We really, when you're looking at doing something really well, it's helpful to have somebody who's maybe even looking over your shoulder, or if you're mentoring a salesperson, to have the sales manager sitting on the call with them as well and saying, I'm just here to listen. I'm just here to coach. And I'm not going to say anything right now, but to have that person there to then immediately after the conversation to say, these are some of the things you did well, or these are some of the things that I want to work on, or even posing the question for them. And we love this question is, how do you think that went? That's such a good way of starting a coaching conversation. How do you think that went? If you're coming out of a presentation, somebody's, your direct report just gave a talk, ask them afterwards, how do you think that went? They will then prompt you. You're trying to deliver this feedback as soon as possible. It's a really common problem in companies where feedback is only given in a formal review period once or twice a year. That's not very helpful. So that is a really important element of deliberate practice, is having that feedback.
And tying into this next piece is how do you think that went, and how do you know? It's like that's that's a key piece. That goes back to that piece, is that you have clear examples of what that performance looks like. So again, this goes back to a lot of the conversations we've had in the past. That idea of something being highly targeted. So in a company, it's really key to have those conversations around what are the guiding principles. What do we say that expert performance looks like? What are the key core values? So what are we going for? All these pieces of competencies development plans. So it's very clear that what we're shooting for in terms of our development as professionals is highly defined by the organization. And again, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. Wade and I have taken companies through a process where it's like really looking at what are your core values and how does it look in practice, and then having everybody in the organization agree to that. And the agreement is a key piece that provides clarity.
Yeah, and I think one other thing, just to mention it, is that having those things outlined beforehand, as Zoltan mentioned, is so helpful for any kind of development conversation, support conversation that you're having with a person who you're mentoring. Because if you don't have those ideas, as we were just talking about, predefined, like what is our agreement that excellent work looks like, then Zoltan's idea could be different from my idea, and we could both be right. It's just that if Zoltan is my manager and he's coming to me and saying, well, I didn't see this particular thing, but my perspective is, well, I did this thing really well, but he's not paying attention to it, and I'm not aware of what he thinks is excellent work, what makes this excellent, then we're going to have a mismatch. And chances are he's probably going to say, Wade is not doing very well on this job because we haven't discussed comprehensively what great work might look like. So when we talk about these things, we talk about them in the context of being an exemplar. Like, what does a perfect example look like? What are we constantly striving towards? What does absolute excellence, what kind of things do we experience when we experience absolute excellence? So we need to understand what true success looks like. We need to understand also what are the metrics that we're going to track in order to be sure that we're seeing these things. So we're actually going a little bit farther down, and we're going to talk about this in an example of goal setting in a minute. But what we want to see is that we understand what skills are being practiced. We want to understand what behaviors and attitudes are being demonstrated. And that is in order to focus on what are the puzzle pieces that are going to propel us towards reaching the outcome that we want. Because those are the things that we're actually doing. To just manage around an outcome, it isn't super effective. So we're not developing new skills if we're just focused on how's it going with project X. So we're going to talk about that in a minute.
And again, we talked a little bit about this idea of the feedback-rich environment. And we talk about this a lot. What are the evidence of success? And again, the evidence is really around what are those behaviors that you actually have control over. So this idea of what can be coached. So, we think about, if we're thinking about, as Wade mentioned earlier, your manager could be sitting in on a call and listening. That's evidence. And you can go back and you can look at that and say, okay, so here's the strong points in this. Here's something that could be improved. There's all kinds of documentation of our daily work. We don't often think of our daily work product as evidence of development, but bringing those into the conversations is really key. And then again, the idea, and Wade alluded to this before, if we're having these conversations quarterly, we're not going to make much progress. If we have them pretty much every day, and that's an ideal that most organizations can't meet, but at least weekly or bi-weekly, where we're really thinking about, so what is the next immediate goal that I'm going for, and how can I improve that in that next short term?
Yeah. So we're going to use something that's really popular in the business world, and that is the OKR framework. And we're going to use the OKR framework to describe what companies often get very, very wrong when they start to use OKRs. And we're going to talk a little bit about how a deliberate practice mindset can actually help address some of those challenges.
And this goes back, one of our favorite articles and writers is Atul Gawande. For those of you who don't know, Atul Gawande is an eminent surgeon, but he's also a prolific author, writing about all kinds of aspects of things related to professionalism and medicine, everything. And several years ago, in the New Yorker, he wrote an article that I really highly recommend you look at. It's called Personal Best. So in this idea of that he wrote about, he said, he was thinking about sports, and he was actually talking about his own practice with tennis. He's a tennis player, amateur tennis player, and he had a coach for helping him get better at tennis. And it started getting him to think, well, why don't I have a coach for my surgery? I'm a surgeon. Why don't I have a coach for that? And one of the things he talked about in this article is that a key metric of ability in surgery is complication rate. So you want to have the lowest complication rate as possible for your patients. And he talked about how his complication rate was fine, but it sort of plateaued at a level and it wasn't getting better. So he had this objective that he wanted to lower his complication rate. And again, a key result might have been in the objective key results. He didn't talk about it in these terms. I think the article was actually written before the OKR concept came around. But a key result could be, I'm going to have a complication rate below 1%. But the thing that's missing is what's in the middle. So what he talked about in this article was that he brought a mentor of his in, one of his medical school professors, and had him observe him doing surgery. And what this mentor said to him is, like, when you're making that cut with a scalpel, your elbow is too low. Raise your elbow. And he found that just by doing that little thing and being intentional about practicing that little thing, again, started reducing his complication rate. So it's an interesting thing here, like in a typical OKR focused conversation, and Wade and I have both had these, we've experienced them as being coached. the idea of what's the objective. So in Atul Gawande's example, his objective was to lower the complication rate. The key, in that OKR 03 that I might be having, the next question is, so where are we in obtaining those key results? So it's like, okay, so I'm at 1.6%. It's my goal is less than 1, but it's at 1.6%. So then the conversation goes to, okay, so in the next 2 weeks, work at having your complication rate be at 1.5%, because that shows gradual improvement. This could be related to sales, it could be related to anything. The thing that's missing is like, how do you get to that? Go ahead.
Right. And I love the really common manager question. And this is such a well-intentioned question, but it's so poorly informed, is what do you need from me in order to get to that goal? What can I do for you? Which is a really good, it's a well-intended question from a manager who's trying to practice their servant leadership. But your job a little bit is to know what this person might need. And only in an extreme circumstance might there be like, hey, I actually really need this one thing and we don't have it. Like, could I have that? But that doesn't happen that often. So anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No, not at all. And again, with that question, it's like, what can be coached in this whole thing? What can, there's no evidence of what I can do right now to get to that less than 1% complication rate. So in a deliberate practice focused conversation, you still bring the objective and key results. Those are key. But again, the objective is the same. We're going to lower the complication rate. Next question, instead of where are we, is what is that skill or behavior or strategy that I am going to practice? Remember, we talked about in deliberate practice, it's like you choose a targeted, manageable, something that you can control. And so what is that strategy that I'm going to focus on? So in Atul Gawande's example, he's going to focus on raising his elbow when he does surgery. And then that idea of what's the goal for the next session is like, what am I gonna collect between my now and my next session with my manager or my coach, that is going to be part of that next conversation, not just the numbers, but I can keep a record of that. I can reflect on it. I can have somebody watch me. I can take videos of myself doing surgery and see how am I doing with that particular skill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to kind of bring that all home, there's this missing piece to this OKR framework that we often see, and that is going just a little bit deeper. And as important as goal setting is, we need to also commit to actions. And in my opinion, and this may be a hot take for any other coaches that are watching this, but actually I don't think it is. I think we all kind of see eye to eye on this, is that the action plan is actually more important than the goal setting. Like, you can't really control always your output, your results. Like you might have your OKR of expand our commercial footprint, and our key result on that is $200,000 of closed revenue as a salesperson. This has been the case for me. So I can hustle and do everything that I think I need to do in order to get to this 200K number. But ultimately, like, one of these deals is going to fall through. Somebody is going to actually turn out to not have the kind of budget authority that we wanted them to. And these things are just things that you find out over time. But if you're in a 3-month time period and you get to only 100,000 out of 200,000 of a goal, you're going to look like you failed. Whereas you might have done everything right along the way. So instead of looking too much at the outcome, let's focus more instead on what are the kinds of things that we're asking ourselves and each other to do. So instead of saying 200K in closed revenue, how about 10 new opportunities a month? Like, and what kinds of things do we need to do to generate 10 new opportunities a month? Well, based on our email sending rate, we know that we need to send 1,000 emails in order to get 2 responses, 2 meetings. So we need to send 5,000 emails in order to get 10 responses. So you might focus on that. So then you could say at the end to the sales rep, okay, show me your 5,000 emails. If your 5,000 emails are here, great. If your 5,000 emails aren't here, what happened that got in the way of your emails? So if we are looking and thinking about, so I want you to think about as for this exercise, and you can take this away and do it today with your team, by yourself, whatever it is. We always include an exercise in these because we want you to actually have something to do. So think about an exercise, an OKR that's part of your development plan. And then as a next step, we want you to make a list of 3 to 4 skills, behaviors, or strategies that will lead to that objective being met. Try to get as granular as possible, just like in that previous example. Go to the numbers that you have. If you know that it takes 10 cold calls in order to book 1 meeting, write your goals down, not in the sense of like, hey, I want 10 meetings. Write it in the number of cold calls that you have to do. If you are trying to solve an engineering problem, figure out what data you have that can help you commit to some kind of action, some kind of activity, and focus on those skills. So make that list. And then finally, we want you to list the indicators of success that you can get feedback on. So this is going to be something that if you take this, you can ask your team this too. If you have people reporting to you, say, I want you to bring, like, as you're going through this, as you're doing the actions that we've outlined, think about maybe bring me 3 examples of stuff that you've done, and we're going to break it down. We're going to look at, how did this go? How do you think this went? Back to that question, and then break it down and say, okay, why do you think that went well? Like, show me some specific about that. So then you can get better at it over time. So that's just a little bit of a different perspective, and that's what these sessions are all about. These are not new terms, but we think about them in these ways that are a little different.
Yeah, so Wade and I talked about this, and we did one for some of my work, and thinking about doing this exercise with my work. So again, my work is coaching teams to improve their team function. So an example could be an objective for my work is to improve my coaching ability so that my teams will meet production quotas by the end of the quarter. That's pretty common, for any kind of manager coach's work. And then the key result will be that the teams meet or exceed those production quotas, and that's clear. Like this, we have some clear measure of what success is going to look like. So now, as I'm thinking about that idea of what is it that I can intentionally practice, and what is it that I can get direct feedback on. So here's some skills that are part of that work of developing teams. So one of them is I want my team members to be reflective, and one of the keys to that is that idea of them bringing evidence of progress, being reflective around those around using evidence of progress to guide their reflection. That's a practice that I want to support my team members in being better at doing. Part of my work, if I have a diverse sort of team where there's a lot of different functions in it, I might not totally understand exactly what the engineers on the team do, or what the marketing people on the team do. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a better understanding of what those key functions are that they engage in on a day-to-day basis. And then maybe it's like we've got a communication problem with the team. So I'm going to use Slack and really work on clear updates and communication with the team. So I've got 3 practices, 3 strategies that I can actually focus on and get better at. I might prioritize one over the other, depending on the situation, but these are just 3 examples. And so then those indicators of success for that first one, helping my team become more reflective, I can do Q&A with them. Like, how's it going? How's what are you thinking of this reflective practice? Are you seeing a benefit in it? Are you confused about how to sort of what kind of evidence that you can bring to be reflective around? I might have, as I'm going around talking to people, figuring out exactly what it is that they do, I have some notes. I can use those notes for clarity. It's like, is this accurate? Do I have it right, what the engineering team does? And then that last piece, I'll just bring copies of Slack messages and then talk to, maybe do a survey of my team members or talk to them. It's like, was that clear? What do you think? How can I improve that? And so then when I'm coming to my own O3 with my manager, I can bring these pieces of evidence and we can say, okay, so, your Slack messages, not clear. Like it seemed like you were rushing through them. Some people got one message from them, some people got another one. So let's work on how can we clarify your language in those Slacks and make sure that you're using them deliberately. So this is an example of taking these three things, think about the OKR, list those skills, strategies, behaviors that you can get feedback on, that you can find evidence for, and then think about what is the indicator of success that you can point to.
Awesome. So we hope this was really helpful to everybody who's watching, and we do have some people in the audience here, so we want to turn it over now to our audience members and find out if they have any questions. Samuel, are you still with us? We were having some audio trouble earlier, so maybe not, but one of the things that I love that you just kind of outlined there, Zoltan, is I think there's a responsibility on behalf of the person who's coaching to think about some of that stuff, and to also prompt people. So this is often about how can we actually get people to think of it. You always are saying, I always tell people your story of you always say that it's your dream to get the other person to do 95% of the talking in a coaching session. So it's a big part of it.
Yeah, and I think with that, one of that key pieces of putting the driving force in the person's personal development and their professional development is one key to that is just like let them determine what the evidence is. As I'm a manager, I might say, okay, so this would be an indicator of your growth. But if my employee said, here's 5 different things that I want you to see, I want you to take a look at, and that puts it in the employee's hand and the person being coach's hands.
Yeah. And Samuel from the audience is just asking us, what does OKRs stand for? And I am happy to answer this question. So OKRs stands for objectives and key results. And that's OKR. And what it's a management strategy. And basically it's saying that we have this objective is like a top level goal. So that might be become the market leader for our product. So that's a big kind of broad goal. This is what we envision ourselves doing. And then the key results are the actual committable things that are below that. So it's like 100 customers, 100 new customers in a year, or like 50%, 51% market share based on this research report. And so it's those types of things. And so what we're saying about OKRs is really that it's great to have those types of goals. We just need to get them specific enough to describe the activities and behaviors that are going to go into how to achieve that. And that's often where people get the OKRs wrong, is that they stop at the 100 new customers. And so then they just are everything they do is focused on 100 new customers. Like, how many do we have? How many do we have? And not as much focused on what are the skills and behaviors that our people need to demonstrate in order to achieve that.
Like a skill with that could be, what's the subject line of your emails that you're sending out? Like, is it the subject line that people are going to click on, or is it one that they're going to put in the trash? Yeah. Great. All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you next week. But again, reference the YouTube channel with our other videos on there. We certainly love to hear your feedback.
Thanks everyone for joining us. See you next week.